Today, March 7th, 2026, a California firearms bill is officially moving toward its first major legislative hurdle. And what's inside it has serious implications for anyone who owns or plans to own a firearm in that state. Senate Bill 948 has been scheduled for a committee hearing on March 17th, 2026 at 8:30 in the morning before the Public Safety Committee. That date matters. That hearing is where the bill gets its first real test, and given the legislative pattern we've seen out of Sacramento in recent years, it's worth understanding exactly what this bill contains before it gets that far. This is Thomas Updates, and here's what you need to know. Right now, under existing California law, before you can receive or acquire any firearm, any transfer, any purchase, you are required to obtain a Firearm Safety Certificate, commonly known as an FSC. To get that certificate today, you have to pass a written test. The test covers topics like California firearms laws, safe storage, safe handling, and general ownership responsibilities. Once you pass, you receive your card. That card is valid for 5 years. It can be revoked at any time, and once it expires, you go through the entire process again. That's the system as it currently stands. Senate Bill 948 would change that system significantly. Under the proposal, the existing written test requirement would be replaced, or more precisely, substantially expanded, with a mandatory minimum 8-hour in-person training course. That course would also be required to include at least 1 hour of live fire training at a range. The curriculum outlined in the bill covers a broad range of topics: federal and California firearms laws, safe storage and transportation requirements, safe handling fundamentals, accidental risk scenarios, procedures for legally relinquishing firearms, self-defense law, and conflict resolution. The full 8 hours would need to be completed with a passing grade from a certified instructor before any FSC is issued. Now, it's worth pausing on what that actually means in practice. Under the current system, the fee to obtain an FSC is minimal. It creates a financial barrier, but a limited one. Under the structure proposed in SB 948, that cost profile changes considerably. You would be looking at paying a certified instructor for a full day of training, covering range fees and ammunition for the live fire component, and potentially taking time off work to attend a scheduled class on a date that works for an available instructor. The bill does not set a fixed fee cap for instructor costs. That would be left to the market. Analysts who have reviewed the bill's structure suggest the total out-of-pocket cost under this new system could be substantially higher than what obtaining the current FSC requires. It's worth noting that this remains an estimate until a formal fee structure is established. Analysis. Specific cost figures are not fixed in the bill text and will vary by instructor and location. This connects directly to something we covered earlier here on Thomas Updates. In the SB2 breakdown, we walked through the expanding financial layers already being added to firearms ownership in California, from the 11% excise tax on firearms purchases to the new recurring fingerprinting fees tied to CCW renewals. If you haven't seen that video yet, I'd encourage you to check it out because SB 948 represents another layer being added to that same framework. Each individual requirement may seem manageable in isolation. When you account for all of them together, the cumulative cost of lawful firearms ownership in California continues to grow, and that's a trend worth tracking closely. If you're following along and want to stay current as this bill moves through the process, this is a good moment to subscribe to Thomas Updates. We'll have coverage as this develops, and the next few weeks are going to be significant. Back to the bill. There's a provision inside SB 948 that directly addresses people moving into California. Under the proposal, if you are relocating to California and you currently own firearms, you would have 60 days from establishing residency to complete the new training requirement, obtain your FSC under the expanded standard, and file what the bill refers to as a new resident firearm ownership report with the California Department of Justice. miss that 60-day window, and according to the bill's language, you would be in legal jeopardy with the state DOJ. That is a meaningful compliance burden, particularly for people moving from other states where no equivalent training requirement exists or is even contemplated. It's important to be clear about where this bill stands right now. SB 948 is a legislative proposal. It has not passed. It has not been signed into law. It is approaching its first committee review. The Public Safety Committee hearing is scheduled for March 17th and is expected to be live streamed, meaning the public record of that hearing will be available. Passage through that committee does not make it law. The bill would still need to clear additional legislative steps before it could reach the governor's desk. But in California's legislature, committee passage is typically the first significant procedural checkpoint, and bills that clear it tend to advance further. As an analytical observation, and this is analysis, not confirmed legislative fact, the structure of SB 948 has similarities to expanded training frameworks that have been proposed or introduced in at least 2 other states in recent years. California has historically functioned as a reference point for state-level firearms legislation in other jurisdictions. Whether SB 948's specific provisions would influence lawmakers elsewhere would depend entirely on this bill's ultimate fate and how courts respond to it if challenged. Analysis. That legal question is actually worth examining briefly. If SB 948 were to pass and become law, it would very likely face a constitutional challenge. Under the Bruin standard the Supreme Court established in 2022, the government is required to justify firearms-related regulations by demonstrating that they are consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation, not simply by pointing to public safety goals. Whether a mandatory 8-hour training course with a live fire component required as a precondition to obtaining any firearm could survive scrutiny under that standard is a question courts would ultimately need to answer. We've covered the Bruin framework in detail in previous Thomas Updates videos, so if you want that full legal background, it's there for you. For now, what is confirmed is this. SB 948 is active. It is moving through the California legislature, and its first public legislative test is 10 days away on March 17th. The bill proposes a significant expansion of what California requires before a resident can lawfully receive a firearm. The cost and access implications of that expansion are real and measurable, and they fall on law-abiding gun owners already navigating a complex regulatory environment in that state. We'll continue following this at Thomas Updates and report as the committee hearing unfolds and the bill's trajectory becomes clearer. If you want to be notified the moment the coverage drops, the best way to stay informed is to subscribe to the channel. And just to be clear about what we do here, everything in this video is drawn from publicly available legislative text, official hearing schedules, and documented procedural history. This is informational and educational content reflecting analysis based on public sources, and it is not legal advice. If SB 948 or any California firearms law directly affects your specific situation, consulting a licensed attorney is always the right step.